What's up, you guys? We are on a new book today, the book of Leviticus. And so we are on week 6, day 3, and we're going to be covering Leviticus chapters 1 through 4. And just a little context on Leviticus. So Leviticus continues the story of Exodus given while Israel was still in Sinai. Just after the tabernacle's completion, it gives detailed instructions for the sacrifices that would be offered there by the priest, all descendants of Levi, from whom the book derives its name. Get it? Levi, Leviticus. I didn't know that. I feel like it makes sense. I don't know why I didn't know that, but anyway, this is the third. Yes, the third of the books of Moses explains how the relationship between God and his people can be restored when they sin. So it's going to just go over details of holy offerings, holy living, a holy God, how they would what they would do if someone was unclean, how they would become clean, how they would get the confirmation from the priest, how the priest would examine them. I think I listened up to about chapter maybe 18 or something. This morning, I spent like an hour listening to Leviticus, which, by the way, please don't think that that's like something I always do. Okay. Like, I'm gonna be like, I listened to an hour this morning, and then you could be like thinking like, what? She listens to an hour every morning. It's like, no, I don't. And I have to be real and honest. But I did this morning because I'm trying to get my life right. No, for real though, I'm really just trying to get back into the rhythm of things, and there's no better day to start trying to do better than today. And so I got up at 5 this morning and I just started listening to Leviticus right away. And I listened to a bunch of devotionals on the Bible app as well. And then did some I did some prayer and some guided prayer on the Bible app as well. Sometimes I'll do that. Like I'll do different things, you know. But today I did that and I do like it. I feel like it's just, I don't know. I like it. I like, you know, listening to the Bible app in bed. I like listening when I get ready. I like listening just different times or whatever, but anyways, it's just some other like, if you think like it just has to be here, like on the table or, at a desk or whatever, like there's so many ways to incorporate the word of God. There's so many ways to incorporate encouragement. Even like YouTube is a way you can incorporate encouragement, the Bible app, your own Bible, Audible, walking and just praying to God during a quiet walk. I think that's like one of my favorite things is just like walking in peace and meditating and thinking about the goodness of God. But anyways, so we are covering Leviticus today. We're going to be covering chapters 1 through 4, as I said earlier. And so let's just get started because this is so much detail. So chapter 1, procedures for the burnt offering. Actually, let me set my timer. I'm trying to make these videos like no more than 20 minutes. So I don't know what I talked maybe for 5 minutes already. So we'll set this to 15 minutes. So chapter 1, it says, the Lord called to Moses from the tabernacle and said to him, give the following instructions to the people of Israel. When you present an animal as an offering to the Lord, you may take it from your herd of cattle or your flock of sheep and goats. If the animal you present as a burnt offering is from the herd, it must be a male with no defects. Bring it to the entrance of the tabernacle so you may be accepted by the Lord. Lay your hand on the animal's head, and the Lord will accept its death in your place to purify you, making you right with him. Then slaughter the young bull in the Lord's presence, and Aaron's sons, the priest, will present the animal's blood by splattering it against all sides of the altar that stands at the entrance of the tabernacle. Then skin the animal and cut it into pieces. The sons of Aaron, the priest, will build a wood fire on the altar. They will arrange the pieces of the offering, including the head and fat, on the wood burning on the altar, but the internal organs and the legs must first be washed with water. Then the priest will burn the entire sacrifice on the altar as a burnt offering. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Okay, so then verse 10 says, if the animal you present as a burnt offering is from the flock, it may be either a sheep or a goat, but it must be a male with no defects. Slaughter the animal on the north side of the altar in the Lord's presence. And the priest will arrange the pieces of the offering, including the head and fat, on the wood burning on the altar, but the internal organs and legs must first be washed with water. Then the priest will burn the entire sacrifice on the altar as a burnt offering. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Verse 14 says, if you present a bird as a burnt offering to the Lord, choose either a turtle dove or a young pigeon. The priest will take the bird to the altar, wring off its head, and burn it on the altar. But first he must drain its blood against the side of the altar. The priest must also remove the crop and the feathers and throw them in the ashes on the east side of the altar. Then, grasping the bird by its wings, the priest will tear the bird open, but without tearing it apart. Then he will burn it as a burnt offering on the wood burning on the altar. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And that's chapter 1. Anybody else happy that we don't have to do that anymore? Because I know when I was listening to this, I was like, what? I know I can't. And I'm just so thankful. What I take from this is I am just so incredibly thankful to God that we do not have to do this anymore. Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice. And I'm happy that he tore the veil for us to have access to God, to be able to pray, to be able to come before him without having to do this, without having to do all of this. It's so specific, like what you put on the east and on the left and the right and everything. I feel like I would need a book and follow it like a recipe when you're baking something, to not go wrong, especially because it's something you're presenting before God. So you want it to be perfect and pure and correct. And so I just take, wow. And thank you, God, that we don't have to do this anymore, and that's kind of what I'm taking from all of this. And so far. So now chapter 2, it's procedures for the grain offering. When you present grain as an offering to the Lord, the offering must consist of choice flour. You are to pour olive oil on it, sprinkle it with frankincense, and bring it to Aaron's sons, the priest. The priest will scoop out a handful of the flour moistened with oil together with all the frankincense and burn this representative portion on the altar. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. The rest of the grain offering would then be given to Aaron and his sons. This offering would be considered a most holy part of the special gifts presented to the Lord. Verse 4 says, if your offering is a grain offering baked in an oven, it must be made of choice flour, but without any yeast. It may be presented in the form of thin cakes mixed with olive oil or wafers spread with olive oil. If your grain offering is cooked on a griddle, it must be made of choice flour mixed with olive oil, but without any yeast. Break it in pieces and pour olive oil on it. It is a grain offering. If your grain offering is prepared in a pan, it must be made of choice flour and olive oil. And then it says, no matter how a grain offering for the Lord has been prepared, bring it to the priest who will present it at the altar. The priest will take a representative portion of the grain offering and burn it on the altar. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. The rest of the grain offering will then be given to Aaron and his sons as their food. This offering will be considered a most holy part of the special gifts presented to the Lord. Verse 11 says, do not use yeast in preparing any of the grain offerings you present to the Lord, because no yeast or honey may be burned as a special gift presented to the Lord. You may add yeast and honey to an offering of the first crops of your harvest, but these must never be offered on the altar as a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Season all your grain offerings with salt to remind you of God's eternal covenant. Never forget to add salt to your grain offerings. If you present a grain offering to the Lord from the first portion of your harvest, bring fresh grain that is coarsely ground and roasted on a fire. Put olive oil on this grain offering and sprinkle it with frankincense. The priest will take a representative portion of the grain moistened with oil together with all the frankincense and burn it as a special gift presented to the Lord. Now we're on chapter 3, you guys, procedures for the peace offering. If you present an animal from the herd as a peace offering to the Lord, it may be a male or female, but it must have no defects. Lay your hand on the animal's head and slaughter it at the entrance of the tabernacle. Then Aaron's sons, the priest, will splatter its blood against all sides of the altar. The priest must present part of this peace offering as a special gift to the Lord. This includes all the fat around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys and the fat around them near the loins, and the long lobe of the liver. These must be removed with the kidneys, and Aaron's sons will burn them on top of the burnt offering on the wood burning on the altar. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Verse 6 says, if you present an animal from the flock as a peace offering to the Lord, it may be a male or a female, but it must have no defects. If you present a sheep as your offering, bring it to the Lord, lay your hand on its head, and slaughter it in front of the tabernacle. Aaron's sons will then splatter the sheep's blood against all sides of the altar. The priest must present the fat of this peace offering as a special gift to the Lord. This includes the fat of the broad tail cut off near the backbone, all the fat around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys, and the fat around them near the loins and the long lobe of the liver. These must be removed with the kidneys, and the priest will burn them on the altar. It is a special gift of food presented to the Lord. If you present a goat as your offering, bring it to the Lord, lay your hand on its head and slaughter it in front of the tabernacles. Aaron's sons will then splatter the goat's blood against all sides of the altar. The priest must present part of this offering as a special gift to the Lord. This includes all the fat around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys, and the fat around them and near the loins, and the long lobe of the liver. These must be removed with the kidneys, and the priest will burn them on the altar. It is a special gift of food, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. All the fat belongs to the Lord. You must never eat any fat or blood. This is a permanent law for you, and it must be observed from generation to generation wherever you live. I remember reading that and thinking it is interesting because you really don't eat like the fat from meat. Well, I don't know. I think some people do, right? Chapter 4, which says procedures for the sin offering. It says, Then the Lord said to Moses, give the following instructions to the people of Israel. This is how you are to deal with those who sin unintentionally by doing anything that violates one of the Lord's commands. If the high priest sins, bringing guilt upon the entire community, he must give a sin offering for the sin he has committed. He must present to the Lord a young bull with no defects. He must bring the bull to the Lord at the entrance of the tabernacle, lay his hand on the bull's head, and slaughter it before the Lord. The high priest will then take some of the bull's blood into the tabernacle, dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord in front of the inner curtain of the sanctuary. The priest will then put some of the blood on the horns of the altar for fragrant incense that stands in the Lord's presence inside the tabernacle. He will pour out the rest of the bull's blood at the base of the altar for burnt offerings at the entrance of the tabernacle. Then the priest must remove all the fat of the bull to be offered as a sin offering. This includes all the fat around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys, and the fat around them near the loins, and the long lobe of the liver. He must remove these along with the kidneys, just as he does with cattle offered as a peace offering, and burn them on the altar of burnt offerings. But he must take whatever is left of the bull, its hide, meat, head, legs, internal organs, and dung, and carry away to a place outside the camp that is ceremonially clean. Ceremonially clean, the place where the ashes are dumped. There on the ash heap, he will burn it on a wood fire. Verse 13 says, if the entire Israelite community sins by violating one of the Lord's commands, but the people don't realize it, they are still guilty. When they become aware of their sin, the people must bring a young bull as an offering for their sin and present it before the tabernacle. The elders of the community must then lay their hands on the bull's head and slaughter it before the Lord. The high priest will then take some of the bull's blood into the tabernacle, dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord in front of the inner curtain. He will then put some of the blood on the horns of the altar for fragrant incense that stands in the Lord's presence inside the tabernacle. He will pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar for burnt offerings at the entrance of the tabernacle. Then the priest must remove all the animal's fat and burn it on the altar, just as he does with the bull offered as a sin offering for the high priest. Through this process, the priest will purify the people, making them right with the Lord, and they will be forgiven. Then the priest must take what is left of the bull and carry it outside the camp and burn it there, just as is done with the sin offering for the high priest. This offering is for the sin of the entire congregation of Israel. We're on verse 22, which says, if one of Israel's leaders sins by violating one of the commands of the Lord his God, but doesn't realize it, he is still guilty. When he becomes aware of his sin, he must bring as his offering a male goat with no defects. He must lay his hand on the goat's head and slaughter it at the place where burnt offerings are slaughtered before the Lord. This is an offering for his sin. Then the priest will dip his finger in the blood of the sin offering and put it on the horns of the altar for burnt offerings. He will pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. Then he must burn all of the goat's fat on the altar, just as he does with the peace offering. Through this process, the priest will purify the leader from his sin, making him right with the Lord, and he will be forgiven. Then it says, if any of the common people sin by violating one of the Lord's commands, but they don't realize it, they are still guilty. When they become aware of their sin, they must bring an offering for their sin, a female goat with no defects. They must lay a hand on the head of the sin offering and slaughter it at the place where burnt offerings are slaughtered. Then the priest will dip his finger in the blood and put it on the horns of the altar for burnt offerings. He will pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. Then he must remove all the goat's fat, just as he does with the fat of the peace offering. He will burn the fat on the altar, and it will be a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Through this process, the priest will purify the people, making them right with the Lord, and they will be forgiven. If the people bring a sheep as their sin offering, it must be a female with no defects. We're almost done. We really are. We have like 4 more verses and this video is over. So hang in there. I know it's like sounds repetitive and stuff, and some of it is kind of a little bit repetitive, but we have to read it, okay? So back to verse 32. If the people bring a sheep as their sin offering, it must be a female with no defects. They must lay a hand on the head of the sin offering and slaughter it at the place where burnt offerings are slaughtered. Verse 34 says, then the priest will dip his finger in the blood of the sin offering and put it on the horns of the altar for burnt offerings. He will pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. Then he must remove all the sheep's fat, just as he does with the fat of a sheep presented as a peace offering. He will burn the fat on the altar on top of the special gifts presented to the Lord. Through this process, the priest will purify the people from their sin, making them right with the Lord, and they will be forgiven. And that is the end of chapter 4, you guys. And that is also the end of day 3, week 6. So remember, in reading all this, all these details, the specificness of everything and having to do it exactly like this, I just say, like, this makes me just want to thank God even more and say, thank you, Jesus, for the sacrifice that you made for us. And, you know, we're coming into Easter, and what time is there better than now to start preparing our hearts, to start repenting and start asking and telling God, thank you for what you have done for us. Thank you for what you have done for us full of sin and flaws, and that you should want to have a relationship with us. It blows my mind. When I was in my meditation, it was saying, okay, what are like some good thoughts that you are thinking of God? And I'm just like, I'm always in awe that he would want to use someone like me, that he would want to use us, that he would want to use us broken and unqualified and unprepared, and that he would just want to use us. And like, he's waiting for your yes. Like, he wants to use you. And maybe some of you think like, I can't be used because of this or because of that. Maybe you think you can't be used because you have a disability. I know I read a comment one time of someone saying that they were in a wheelchair or something and that they couldn't be used. I literally saw a YouTube video of a young man in a wheelchair being used. with like, I don't know, a gazillion views on his YouTube, inspiring people. It doesn't matter what the enemy tells you is your reason that you can't be used by God. God can use everyone. And whether he's using you as a bad example, because we see that in the Bible, or you choose to be used as a good example, you are being used in one way. Here's the a fact. I think maybe it's my opinion. Maybe it's not a fact. Maybe it's my opinion. Is that we're all examples of something, and that we're all influencers. We're all influencing the people around us to something. Like, let's say you love going to a famous coffee shop, and you always have it, and you're always posting it, and you're like, whether you're intentional about it or not, you're influencing some people to go there, whether it's good or bad. You know, what you're doing influences the people around you, believe it or not. But sometimes there's people that look up to us and we don't realize that they look up to us, you know. I know my children pick up everything that I do and say, and so I have to be extra careful to make sure that what I'm saying and doing is a good example. And so, you know, again, whether you're getting paid for it or not, you are influencing people towards something. And so be intentional about your life and know that God can use you. He can use anyone. And again, be a good example. Like, don't be someone in the Bible that is being used as a warning. Like, you know what I'm saying? Anyways, I love you guys. That is day 3. I'm excited for day 4. I'm excited to get through Leviticus, but I love you guys. See you guys at the next one.